Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Sullivan, and I'm happy to serve this congregation as a member of your Board of Trustees. My pronouns are she, her. Thank you for joining us both in person and online. Please scan the QR code on the screen to let us know that you are here, get a digital version of our order of service, and find our donation page. If you are visiting with us for the first time, welcome. We have a first-time visitor gift for you at the greeter stand out in the gallery. And one of our beloved volunteers will be available in Sloter Lounge, the glass-enclosed room at the back corner of the worship center, to share our getting to know you information. And whether this is your first time or your 500th, we welcome anyone who would like to learn more about who we are and what we believe here at First UU to come chat with us after the service. Please find me or another member of the board in Beach Hall after the service to talk all things church. We have a few announcements this morning. School for Young Children is opening their applications for the 2024-25 school year. They're available on Jovial from now until February 16th. Look for links in Friday News or call our offices for more information. Mark your calendars for our church's mid-year meeting on February 25th at 11:15. Join us for this special gathering where we'll reflect on events of the past year, share exciting updates, and discuss what lies ahead for our community. As valued members, your presence is crucial. Stay tuned for more details. We can't wait to come together and make this meeting a meaningful and collaborative experience. And now I'm going to turn the mic over to Abigail to talk about our exciting upcoming event.
Good morning. My name is Abigail. My pronouns are she, her, and I am one of your youth representatives on the Board of Trustees and a future DA delegate. Sorry, spelled it wrong right here. Everyone is invited to the Enchanted Forest Ball. Step into our magical realm at our all-ages Enchanted Forest Valentine's Ball hosted by the UU Youth Group. Dress in your most magical attire, pose under the twinkling lights in the photo booth, and enjoy some delicious treats as we come together to dance and raise funds for our summer youth group. Tickets are $10 each, available at the coffee hour. You'll see all the big posters, and please join us. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Linda Lesh, and I am doing the Black History Minute, something like that. And we are connecting Black history to the proposed 8th principle that we're all considering. One part of the 8th principle states, by actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppression in our lives and our institutions. The New York Times 1619 Project reviews the history of Black-led efforts to provide federal health care. After the Civil War, former slaves did not have enough food, shelter, clothes, or medical care. As citizens, they requested medical care. The response from whites was ambivalence and antipathy. Whites wanted Blacks to be well enough to work, but feared healthy Blacks would upset the racial social order. They believed Blacks caused and spread disease. In her book about survival, Dr. Rebecca Lee Crumpler, the first Black female doctor, wrote the causes of illness were external, not innate, and that Congress had the power to remove the causes. During the next approximately 100 years, Black leaders in the National Medical Society continued to ask for and promote federal health care programs. Each time the programs passed, they excluded a large majority of Blacks and maintained segregated health care systems that excluded even more Blacks. During the same time, Blacks were subjected to white-run medical procedures or lack thereof, such as the Tuskegee study and the sterilization of Black women, that reduced Blacks' trust in medical care. During the New Deal reforms, such as Social Security, fair labor standards, the GI Bill, aid to dependent children, and the creation of additional hospitals, the reforms were implemented, and Southern congressmen in key positions used their power to exclude Blacks from those benefits and from receiving care, often through employing the concept of states' rights that resulted in continued segregation of health care. The American Medical Association was against nationalized health care. The National Medical Society, a Black group, countered by saying health care is a basic human right, inextricably bound to racial inequality. It wasn't until the formation of Medicare and Medicaid and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that segregation in hospitals ended. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlawed segregation in any entity receiving federal funds, and Medicare and Medicaid placed every hospital in the country in that category. Time and time again, Black medical workers have advocated for better health care for everyone, which has benefited everyone. Finally, under Barack Obama's presidential term, the Affordable Care Act of 2010 offered health insurance to uninsured adults, partly through Medicaid expansion. This helped people of color immensely and resulted in a decrease in health disparities. However, several states refused Medicaid expansion and/or enabled work requirements. Black and Latino populations still have the highest of uninsured rates in the country, as well as a disproportionate share of poor health outcomes. Millions of Americans share their plight of being uninsured and/or unable to obtain necessary health care. Everyone is harmed by our collective unwillingness to provide health care to all as a basic right. Questions for you to think of about: have you benefited from federal health care and other federal programs? Are we, as a congregation, willing to work to reduce health disparities to ensure equitable care for all people? Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for those important lessons of history that are still so important today. I am the Reverend Dr. Teresa Cooley, and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Columbus. Good morning. We begin this service by acknowledging that we gather on the ancestral lands of the Adena, Hopewell, Wyandotte, Miami, Seneca, and Erie and Cayuga people. We cultivate this awareness that concrete acts of solidarity, healing, and reparation accompany our symbolic acknowledgments.
Hello, I am Reverend Meg McGuire. I'm grateful to serve as an affiliated community minister of this congregation, and I use she and her pronouns. Let us enter into the spirit of worship with these opening words by David Breeden. Welcome to a new story. Welcome to a day unwritten. We gather to speak of possibility. We remember the losses. We celebrate the victories. As a people of story, we embrace the possible over the probable, weaving a story of hope. Join us in a new story. Join us in the day unwritten. Join us in the future of possibility. Let us all rise now in body or spirit while our children meet in the back to prepare to bring in the light. I invite you to turn to your neighbor and introduce yourself.
It is now time for our children to bring in the light. We light our chalice with words from Scott Taylor. We light this chalice in honor of the history that holds and heals us, for the stories of heroism that inspire our own, for the loved ones long gone who helped us to see our better selves, for reminders of those who paved the path before us and blessed us with advantages we did not earn on our own. These memories do not live in the past. They carve the contours of our present. They are here today. Look, listen, let them in. May their light guide our way.
Thank you, Calliope, for your help lighting our chalice this morning. Good morning. I'm Amber Scott, your Director of Religious Exploration, and my pronouns are she, they. Today's story is called Mrs. Katz and Tush, written and illustrated by Patricia Polacco. Larnell's mother stopped to see Mrs. Katz almost every day. Since her husband died, she's so alone. Mrs. Katz held her hand tight as they looked at an old photo album. That's my husband, Myron. He came from Poland like me a long time ago. We had such a life, such a life. Her voice broke. We had no children, and I'll be all alone for Hanukkah and Passover. Then she cried. The next day, Larnell said, "A cat had some kittens. We found someone to take them all, except this one, the runt. Nobody wants her because she doesn't have a tail." Mrs. Katz looked at the little kitten. My Myron was ugly too when he was little, but grew up to be such a person. Scrawny little boobala, so small, no tail, I don't know. Then she saw the look on Larnell's face. "I'll take her, but only if you'll come help." Larnell promised. "A good Yiddish name I'll give her," said Mrs. Katz. "Let's see, no tail. All you can see is her tush." "That's it. We'll call her Tush." Little Tush grew healthy and strong. Mrs. Katz cooked for her, brushed her, knitted toys for her, and even read to her. "Such a person," she'd say as she watched Tush play. Mrs. Katz was in love. Larnell kept his promise and visited every day. There was always fresh-baked kugel and milk waiting for him. He grew to love Tush and listening to Mrs. Katz talk about how things used to be. "I came from Warsaw, Poland, to work sewing dresses in the garment district for my cousin Moish. I didn't speak one word of English. How did you talk to people?" "I didn't. I cried a lot until I met Myron. He asked me to marry him after he tasted my kugel." "We used to vacation in the Catskills, a borscht resort, a place for Jews to stay." "You mean Jews couldn't stay anywhere they wanted to?" Mrs. Katz went to a trunk and pulled out some old clothes. "My grandma told me about places she couldn't stay either," Larnell said softly. "Larnell, your people and mine are alike, you know. Trouble we've seen, happiness too. Great strength we've had, yes. The Catskills, we used to dress every Sunday for a costume ball." She put on an old scratched record on the player. "Hear that, Larnell? This is what we used to dance to, from my homeland. Here, I'll show you." They whirled and laughed and giggled. Larnell spent more and more time with Mrs. Katz. "Since you are almost family to me, you should come with me to say Kaddish for my Myron. I know you're not Jewish, but he would have liked you. You're such a person, Larnell." At the cemetery, she read from her book, then asked Larnell to put a small rock on top of Mr. Katz's headstone. "We do this to remember," she said softly. "Shalom, my Myron," she murmured and wiped tears. On the way home, she announced, "Such a kugel I baked for you today. Hurry, Tush will be worried." At home, they called and called, but Tush didn't come. They looked everywhere. Mrs. Katz gasped. The window to the fire escape was open. "Oh no, poor Bubala. She's never been outside. She's been acting strange lately, trying to get out. I was afraid she would get hit by a car." "We'll find her, Mrs. Katz. I won't let you down." It was getting dark. Mrs. Katz and Larnell looked around their building, then went everywhere in the neighborhood. They left notes on doors, telephone poles, and fences, and asked everyone who lived nearby, but no one had seen little Tush. That night, it stormed with rain, awful rain. Mrs. Katz hardly slept as she thought about her little Katila. "She's such a person, she whispered. Larnell worried most of the night, too. "What will Mrs. Katz do?" he thought. "Please, God, bring that little cat back to her," he said into his pillow. A loud knock on the door awoke Mrs. Katz. It was Larnell's father and two neighbors. "Is this yours?" they asked. "My Bubala, little Katila," Mrs. Katz exclaimed. "We found her in the back alley soaking wet and hungry," Mr. Moore said. Thank you, Mrs. Katz said as she took Tush in her arms. Soon Tush had the least desire to go outside again and slept a lot, even when Larnell came over. It was at my Aunt Havela's Passover Seder that I met Myron. What good times they were with lots of family. Now it's just me. "Could I have Passover dinner with you?" asked Larnell. "I thought you would never ask," she exclaimed as she hugged him close. "Such a Seder I'll prepare." "Passover is a time for good food," Mrs. Katz shouted in the crowded deli. "Like your people, mine were slaves too. They lived in a country where they didn't want to be. They wanted freedom so much that they prayed to God to help them. He sent an angel who brought death and sadness to our captors, but the angel did not visit the houses of my people." How did the angel know where the Jews lived? They marked the door, then the angel passed over. That's why we call this time of celebration Passover. We have a big feast, but also remember those who had to suffer so we could be free. Part of the dinner is sad, and part of it is happy. As Larnell helped get out the linens and china, Mrs. Katz said, "You see, this tablecloth was our wedding chuppah, our canopy. For all these years, we've used it for holy days and celebrations. How come you have so many different dishes?" "Because some Jews don't eat dairy and meat off the same ones." When they sat down to Seder, Mrs. Katz lit 2 candles and waved her hands over them. She read from her book, said prayers, smiled, and said, "Let the feast begin." They drank red wine and water and ate bitter herbs, lamb and chicken, gefilte fish, and spicy chopped apples with potato pancakes. "This bread looks like a soda cracker," Larnell exclaimed. "We call it matzah, dear. It's flat because there's no yeast, so it doesn't rise. I've hidden one piece here in the apartment. If you find it, I have a surprise for you." It was a hand-knit sweater just for him. The next day, Mrs. Katz yelled out her back window to Larnell's apartment, "Come quick already, something wonderful." Larnell and his mom and dad rushed to her door. The angel of death passed over, but the angel of life didn't. Mazel tov, Tush. 4 babies, at last, I am a booby. As the years passed, Mrs. Katz, Tush, and her descendants became part of Larnell's family. There were graduations, weddings, new babies, and finally, a Kaddish. Larnell stood in front of the headstone. He read from her book. He placed a small rock on top of her headstone. Then he, his wife, and their children read the inscription together. "Mrs. Katz, our bubby, such a person." The end. When a young boy and an elder come together to care for a cat, they end up finding family and discovering their shared humanity through the power of storytelling. May we consider the ways that our stories can bring us shared meaning, different endings, and new beginnings. Together, let us sing our young people back to their families and out to class.
In this month, we've been sharing our donations with Kaleidoscope Youth Center, which supports youth, transgender youth, GLBTQ youth, who especially need that support in these times when our government is so oppressive for such youth. So I encourage you to be as supportive as you can. Please use the QR code on your order of service or on the screen. Text the number on the screen or go to our website, firstucolumbus.org, and click the Donate tab to share. Your gifts help build a better church and one that we hope will be a better world. Thank you. Our offering will now be gratefully received.
In addition to sharing our financial resources, another way that we build community is through concrete acts of mutual care, like the new rideshare form posted at the bulletin board, which can help folks who need rides to church connect with others who can offer a ride. And we take time each Sunday to hold space for significant joys and concerns within our community. We have a number of sorrows to share this morning. Beverly Davis, a former longtime member, passed peacefully on Friday, February 9th, after an extended experience with cancer. Her memorial is being held Saturday, February 17th at 1 p.m. here at First UU. Our condolences go out to Beverly's friends and family. Sherman McClendon, aged 90, died Wednesday morning, February 7th at St. Anne's Hospital. He had been struggling with respiratory issues. Although not a current member, he attended and had been a member for a long time and donated the stand in the back of the sanctuary that holds orders of service for recycling. His survivors include Lloyd, Tracy, EJ, and Sean McClendon. In addition, sisters-in-law Marilyn Webster and Mariana Webster. We hold Beverly and Sherman and all who love them in our hearts this morning. Holding all of them, I invite you to join me in a time of meditation and contemplation. And as we do, I hope you'll do whatever it is that you need to close your eyes or soften your gaze. Adjust yourself to find a more comfortable posture in your chair. Whatever you need to do to fully inhabit your body. Noticing and honoring any weariness or grief that you're carrying. This body of yours that has journeyed through every moment of your life. That in its strength and aches and scars contains the depth of your story. Every heartbreak, every triumph, the lasting mark of beloved companions, all of the multitudes that make you, you. Now, without needing to open your eyes or turn your head, I invite you to feel into this collective body, all of these beloved companions on the journey. Those physically around you, perhaps, and also all of those bound together in covenant across space and time, through shared commitments, stories, and songs. This tapestry of lives, each precious to behold on its own, and even more magnificent woven together. And finally, I invite you to settle just a bit more into the fullness of this moment, this precious, unique moment that is only as it is because of every single moment that came before it. And all the while contains whole universes of nascent possibility of all that is yet to emerge for you and for us and for this story that we are writing together. Grounded here, where your story meets our story, meets the generative story of this time. Let us enter into a time of shared silence.
Thank you, choir. That was wonderful. I'm the Reverend Sylvia Howe, a retired Unitarian Universalist minister and a member of this congregation. My pronouns are she, her. Among the other things, I gratefully serve as a member of the archives team. We are a lively group who meet every Tuesday at 10 o'clock for food, conversation, and to pursue our love of church history, in that order. Seriously, the archives team does important work. We research church history, we sort and preserve the church records, we organize these records so that they are readily accessible, and we have great discussions about the implications of our church history. This morning, I want to share a bit of our church history that's fascinated many of us for these years: ordination and ministry. Do you know how many members of our congregation have been called to our UU ministry? Do you have any idea of the number of ordinations that have occurred in our midst? Many congregations seldom or never ordain a future member of our clergy. We do. Are you going to put the text up? Since 1962, we have ordained 16 Unitarian Universalist ministers. 9 of us were members of this congregation before we were ministers. The others were staff members who were ordained. In addition, there were several members of this congregation who felt the call here and then went on to other ministries and were ordained by other congregations. Let's backtrack a moment. What exactly is ordination? It is a ceremonial recognition that this person standing before us has fulfilled all the academic, pastoral. The congregation sees in this person the potential to become an outstanding minister. You see, in our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, only a congregation can ordain a person into the ministry. It began in 1962 with Carol Hyde, whose ministry was in the community. This was truly a milestone. In 1962, women ministers were an anomaly. A precedent was set. The list on our screen behind me, you can see the list. Meg McGuire is our last ordinand. I'm confident the list will grow. The question that intrigues me and the archives team is, what is it about our congregation that has impelled so many of us to answer this call to the ministry? What does the congregation provide us that has inspired so many of us? I've heard Joel's story, and I suspect Meg's story is similar. Both were raised in our religious education program. Here they were nourished and challenged. Here they were loved and supported for who they were and what they wanted to do. My story, I too was ordained here, was long in coming. One day I was creating a bulletin board for the Clintonville Community Resource Center, and Reverend Kyle Whittier came up to me and said, "Sylvia, have you ever considered going into the ministry?" How did he know? I'd only begun to admit it to myself. After all, I was a teacher, and many of the women in my family were teachers. Nobody was a minister. Carl's question gave my vision a form and a structure. The rest is history. The first Unitarian Universalist church is unique in this way. We provide love, support, companionship, challenge, all the things needed to support people who have that slight inkling of ministry. I suspect that there are others of you sitting out here this morning who are thinking, me? Ministry? No way. Yes, there is a way. And our congregation provides that love and support that is necessary to do this. So be it.
Please stay seated as we join in hymn numbers 55, Dark of Winter.
Sing with me. Dark of winter, soft and still, your quiet calm surrounds me. Let my thoughts go where they will, ease my mind profoundly. And then my soul will sing out, gentle darkness, soft and still, bring your quiet to me. Darkness, soothe my weary eyes, that I may see more clearly. When my heart with sorrow cries, comfort and caress me. And then my soul may hear a voice, a still small voice of love eternal. Darkness, when my fears arise, let your peace flow through me.
How many of you got through the pandemic by binge watching TV and movies? How many of you binge watched before the pandemic? How many of you are serial binge watchers still? Before the pandemic, it often seemed like many UUs were ashamed to even admit that they watched television. And now we trade the names of shows like we used to trade recipes. I have a good friend who put a posting on Facebook just a couple of days ago. She's entering treatment for cancer, and she wanted to know the names of shows that she could watch while she's recovering. And there were at least, at last count, 75 suggestions. And I don't think this is just because we need something to pass the time. I think it's also because we want to escape into another story, even if it's a story that may be worse than our own. There's a story about a mom reading her toddler his favorite story 3 times in a row, as toddlers often want. And after the 3rd time, the little boy gently takes the book and places it on the floor and stands on it. And then he begins to cry. And his mom was pretty puzzled by this, but she finally realized he didn't want to just hear the story, he wanted to be the story. I think many of us can relate. For me, I haven't just been binge watching. I've been returning to my old favorites over and over and over again, like some people turn to comfort food. And one of these for me is The Lord of the Rings. I wasn't one of those people brought up on those books, but the first time I saw the first movie, I became hooked, and then I went out and found the audiobook version and listened to all 56 hours of it in a single week. Although I admit that I did fast forward through those silly songs. I know, I'm sorry. And I can see why it's been so compelling to generation after generation, but I think particularly it speaks to us in the midst of our seemingly perennial crises. There's something in us which longs to see life as a mission against evil, as a quest for a clear purpose, even when that quest takes us into dangerous directions. There's that scene at the end of The Two Towers when Frodo, the hobbit chosen to carry the ring, is bemoaning the fact that fate has cursed him with this burden and doubting whether he has the strength or the depth of goodness to continue. But Samwise, his loyal companion, puts it in larger terms for him. Still, I wonder, he says, if we shall ever be put into songs or tale. We're in one, of course, but I mean put into words, read by a father to children out of a great big book years and years after. Frodo said, you and I are still stuck in the worst places of the story, and it's all too likely that some will say at this point, shut the book now, I don't want to read anymore. But Sam says, maybe, but I wouldn't be the one to say that. Things done over and over are made into part of the great tale that is different than they are when we are living them. So isn't there a part of us like Sam that longs for our lives to take on the significance of a great heroic tale, remade after, of course, to make everything that we did look good and right? Yet how many of us feel like Frodo at times, that the ending isn't clear, we doubt our ability to go on, and are tempted to say, just shut the book and stop the tale. Especially now, especially in the midst of threats coming at us from all directions. I don't know about you, but I really want to wake up on November 8th, 2024, and speed through these next horrible months. This is a part of the reason many seek out religious community, to understand ourselves in the context of some larger story in which our purpose is clear and a good ending is promised. Christianity, in particular, revolves around the story of Jesus, his life and his work among the poor, and even his crucifixion, all part of the story that everyone who follows him is supposed to use as an inspiration and a promise that things will turn out well if we follow that direction, if they mold their lives around that teaching. When I was doing my doctoral work, I had a conversation with a Christian ethics professor. He said he didn't understand why people would choose Unitarian Universalism over Christianity. Because in his view, people need to know the story and to know what's the beginning, the middle, and the end. So what is the story for Unitarian Universalism? What is the beginning, middle, and end? It can be disconcerting for some when they come to Unitarian Universalist Church to discover that we don't have a central story, that we say that many sacred stories have some promise and inspiration for us, and it is up to us to discover the inspiration that speaks to us. Many of us come to Unitarian Universalism because just one story seems too limiting. And surely that cannot be the only way to look at it. And then many of us realize that even if you have just one story you focus on, it can be interpreted in a variety of ways, depending on what you bring to it. So this could be the very definition of Unitarian Universalism, understanding ourselves to be co-creators of the story, or stories. It is ours to choose and to make meaning of what we find. The externals of the story are not the absolute. What's important are the principles and the values that underlie them. And yet, story is still important. Speaking about our purposes and principles is important, but it is the story of how we live out those values that bring them to life. Humans live by stories, inspired by stories of others, and we need to locate our story within others. Sometimes our excessively rational brains tend to make Unitarian Universalists, myself among them, think that just telling people facts is what will motivate them. Right? The dramatist Lisa Crone said, "It turns out that the only way to get people to understand you has very little to do with objectively outlining the facts. The only way to convince anyone of anything is hardwired into the architecture of the brain, and there's no overriding it. It's story." Story is hardwired into us because it helps us make sense of the past, contextualize the present, find hope in the future. Even with almost the entirety of medical science attesting to the efficacy of vaccines, there are many who don't believe it's true, or even the opposite, that they can be harmful, because they are hearing a different story. The facts don't matter. And yet we still often hold out hope that those facts might make a difference in solving the world's problems. But story will always be more effective. It's not that I think that we as UUs don't want to believe in stories, but sometimes I think we can dismiss them as somehow inferior to facts. But underneath that, I think we do long for them. We want to understand them as a part of a larger mythic structure. There's a reason Joseph Campbell was so compelling to Unitarians in the 1980s. How many of you watched those shows on PBS or read those books? Books like The Mythic Imagination were wildly popular in UU circles, and Campbell talks about the stories that are most compelling to people, both sacred and secular, those that embody a mythic journey in which people have to journey away from home, challenge their own perspectives, encounter obstacles which require strength to overcome before they can return home and live transformed, heroic lives. These journeys can be figurative as well as literal, but the point is to be able to understand our own lives as meaningful and to come to understand our true self in the process. We see this kind of structure in almost all religious stories. We see it in other stories such as the Odyssey, the Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter. It's one of the biggest reasons people seek out religious community, to tell them a different and more meaningful story about themselves. And I recently heard a colleague of mine define transitional ministry this way. Our job is to help a congregation tell a different and more meaningful story about itself. Understanding our lives as a heroic journey is not very easy today, especially when we're caught up in so much that is so completely out of our control, when it seems almost impossible to see the end to these terrible stories in which we find ourselves, let alone believe that things will turn out well. But what if we began to understand ourselves in this way, that we can be co-creators of our story? We don't have to wait for someone else to make meaning of it for us. What if we suspend ourselves and others a finer and deeper purpose in our lives? Because what happens when we understand ourselves this way, when we seek the true calling within ourselves, is that we let go of the needs of our surface self, the ego that demands personal achievement and security, and instead awakens us to a greater compassion for others who are journeying on this earth with us. A few years ago, there was a wonderful episode of Great Performances on PBS, which was actually not about one great performance. It told the story of how artists during the pandemic transformed their experience of the world shutting down. Even though they could no longer perform in all the ways that they were used to, they began to feel a new calling for a different kind of creativity and connection and inclusion. They began to discover new ways to make the arts accessible to everyone, not just people who can buy tickets to a performance. And you can see their palpable joy as they talk about this. They gave performances in parking garages. They were on public avenues and finding all kinds of ways to make their artistry apparent to people and also inspiring to people during that hard time. They were in the act of co-creating their story. You often hear me quoting from activist and poet Adrienne Marie Brown, who talks about the need to undertake the work of emergence, slowing down, learning to model ourselves after natural models in the world. And she says, I have been reflecting a lot lately on how I don't trust people with agendas or master plans. I think of those people as trying to create a new story for others, placing a massive end on the story, a period that only they can see. For me, storytelling is an emergent process, a pollination-style intimacy where the results can't be fully predicted as the conditions shift. I can think of no greater description of developmental ministry, the ministry that you and I are now engaged in, than this: something rooted in a truth that people have experienced, co-created as it is lived, allowing people to stay in the present moment and attend to the work that is before us with intention, seeing the story unfold with ourselves in the midst of it. So this is why the staff and the transition team and I have started to create an ongoing process of storytelling for the congregation. Storytelling that allows you to get to know one another better and more deeply, that creates connections across generations, as with our Time for All Ages did this morning. Storytelling that connects across differences of culture and background and family structure. If you want to see a great example of a group within our church telling compelling stories, I urge you to attend the youth service on March 3rd. You'll be amazed at their perception and their conscious effort of making meaning of their lives. And you just heard the story from Reverend Sylvia about how this church impacted the ministerial stories of so many. A few weeks ago, when I was down and out with bronchitis, we had the idea that we could use this time to introduce the idea of storytelling. Instead of someone offering a sermon, those of you who were here were invited to tell stories of challenging changes to one another. I heard from many of you that you really enjoyed the chance to get to know one another better. I also heard a few of you wanted to run screaming from the building. But I hope that you got a sense of the intention, which is to tell one another the important stories of our lives as a way of telling a complex story about this congregation, weaving together the strands into a greater whole. I promise I'm not going to inflict that on you again this morning. But I do want to engage in a small experiment which can help us see how our hopes for ourselves and the congregation can build upon one another. So you'll see a QR code on the screen. You'll find it in your order of service. Those of you who have smartphones, please take them out and click on the link that comes up when you focus on that QR code. If you don't have a smartphone with you, you can offer your words to one another. But what I want to ask you is to type in words that reflect your hopes and dreams for the congregation going forward. And as you do so, the words that you type in will create a word cloud. And that word cloud will grow with how many people type in the same word. So if you see words up there that reflect your hopes and dreams, then you can type them in again and they'll grow bigger as you see. Everybody got it? You can tell your words to somebody sitting next to you if you don't have a phone. So all kinds of things are really growing here: growth, community, connection. And what this tells us is what's most important to you. What's the most important story or stories that we want to develop together? This is great. Compassion, love, peace, meaning, friendship. All these are so important. You can keep doing this for a while as we go through the rest of our service, and I'll be posting this word cloud in our newsletter this week. These words, our individual lives, our stories of hope and courage and struggle and connection, can all come together to create a new story for this congregation. So let us be about the good work of building it together. And let's join in our final hymn. Or you can put your hand on your heart if you're suffering from one of the multitude of colds that we have going on. And these again are words from the great wise person, Sam Wise Ganji. It's like those old stories you didn't want to know the end of because you couldn't believe it could come out all right. You want to shut the book and stop the tale because it was too scary. But I've realized those folks in those stories, even if they saw themselves as small, learned that they could do something. Even if they didn't understand what it was at the time, those folks understood something important, that there's good in this world and it is worth fighting for. Amen. And now let us extinguish our chalice together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of vision. As we go forth, let us heal and transform ourselves and our world through reason and love. And can we put the Menti back on the screen? That would be great.
coming over to say, you could have made it look like it was rehearsed. Just sneak in and right over